If you're watching and you'd like to participate in the chat, you want to ask a question, please get on to the chat room and ask your questions, because our content will be driven by you. Exciting, huh? You're in control. Somebody has asked, how did I arrive at the concept of real love? And I want to emphasize that I didn't arrive at the concepts of real love through some cleverness on my own part. I want to take no credit for them. I first had to make a mess out of my own life. I was a surgeon for 20 years and highly successful in accumulating praise, wealth, power, all this imitation love stuff that everybody thinks will make them happy and never does. And I discovered that no matter how much of those things you get, you're still not happy, because all the attention, everything that I got was purchased. I had to earn everything that I got. And there's nothing gratifying about affection that you have to pay for. So I became increasingly frustrated, discouraged, found that I couldn't sleep at night, started taking sleeping pills, sedatives, narcotics. I was a narcotics addict for years while I was a surgeon. Went into drug treatment, got out of treatment, and was then just sober and miserable, which is the case with almost all addicts, which is why the recovery rate for people who go into treatment centers is terrible, like 10, 15, 20%. Simply recovering from drugs doesn't even begin to start the process. It's almost nothing. So I was off drugs, but very unhappy. So I started looking around for what makes people happy, what gives people genuine contentment and peace in their lives. And I couldn't find the answer. And I couldn't find anybody that I knew that knew. Went to therapists and group therapy and support groups all over the country. And finally gathered with a bunch of friends, and we just tried whatever we could think of. And kind of through a process of trial and error, and mostly just listening, we realized that the times that we felt happiest were when we just told the truth about ourselves, especially about our mistakes, flaws, fears, foolishness, and felt accepted by one another. It was nothing dramatic, just the simple act of being who we are and accepting the love of other people. It wasn't hugs and kisses. It was just the warmth, the connection to other folks. It was very touching and very simple. And so I started writing what I was learning in just a few pages here and there, a pamphlet, then a book, and another book. And we started inviting people to seminars just locally and then regionally, and then I started touring nationally. And we discovered that these principles work every time. And they're not principles that I so much figured out as principles that I finally just shut up and listened for. So for years, to this day, I go nowhere without a pad of paper or a 3x5 card. And as these insights and thoughts come, I just write them down. And we're not talking about some woo-woo channeling. It's just thoughts and impressions. So it's really all spiritually driven, not religious, but spiritually driven. So they're divine principles. They're true. And that's why they uniformly work. It's why from the very beginning, as I've written about imitation love and real love and getting and protecting behaviors and the law of choice and so on, never has one of those principles had to be changed, modified, edited, because they come from a divine source. So increasingly now, in the beginning I felt kind of silly actually proposing principles this simple, even though they were powerful. And now, with no doubt whatever, with absolute certainty, I can tell people that these principles are true, and that if we apply them, if we really diligently live by them, They will work. They will give us the happiness that we're looking for. So pretty fantastic stuff. And because of the divine origin of it, and because they're not just figured out cleverly, they're as exciting and new to me day by day as they are to anybody else. I enjoy this more now than I did in the beginning. Here's a man who says, I'm a doctor, and I was wondering how to apply being seen while in practice. And I assume that you mean how to be seen by your patients or by your employees. Is that what you mean by that? If so, in the beginning, I wouldn't suggest it, actually. When I say tell the truth about ourselves and create opportunities to feel unconditionally loved, the idea is to tell the truth about ourselves to people who are capable of loving us, people with whom the odds of feeling loved are highest. So I generally recommend that as we are first taking the baby steps of sharing who we are with people, telling the truth about ourselves at work, for example, is probably very unwise. You don't want to make your first steps going to work and saying to your boss, for example, you know, I feel really empty and afraid, or I feel really inadequate here, or I feel really angry at you. Not a great place to start, because the consequences of truth-telling are, this is an important phrase, unnecessarily high, unnecessarily risky. In any truth-telling, there's some risk, some fear. So why make it the highest? So initially, you want to be seen by people who can reward you with as much love as possible, and where you reduce the risk as much as possible. So like, for example, in a difficult marriage, in most difficult marriages, because in most marriages, rarely do both couples, or excuse me, both partners in a couple, rarely do both of them dive into real love equally at the same time. That just doesn't happen. And it's unlikely. I mean, come on, the odds are that they wouldn't. So if the relationship is in trouble to begin with, it's because both partners don't have sufficient real love to start with, and they've already demonstrated that they don't know how to love their partner. So probably the person to tell the truth with in the beginning isn't going to be your own partner, because your partner's already made it clear that he or she doesn't know how to love you unconditionally. So starting off usually with your spouse, or with somebody at work, or with a critical parent, or with, you know, somebody who has already made it clear that they can't accept you, not a good start. Pick somebody where the odds are high that they'll love you. Start there. And then as you have enough positive experiences with them, you can start to broaden your field of people with whom you tell the truth. And eventually, you'll discover, and when I mean eventually, like in a year or two, you'll discover you can tell the truth about yourself to anybody. Because you have such a store of real love, that $20 million that I talk about in the book, that if any given person doesn't give you $2 or even takes $2 from you, you don't care. Big deal. So make the beginning easy, eh? Here's another person who says, a psychoanalyst friend of mine, having been introduced to real love, thought that it was very much an oversimplification of matters and was inadequate to deal with many problematic behaviors. I've heard that many times. And of course my response would be, and I have had conversations with these people on many occasions, oversimplified where? And so far I've never gotten an adequate response to that. It's really easy to say, that sounds oversimplified, and yet No one ever has a response to show me how it doesn't work. We've now done this with thousands of people. And if this is oversimplified, then I'll take oversimplified. Because this consistently works with people of every culture that we've ever applied it to, under every situation that we've ever applied it to. So I've been pretty astonished at how consistently effective it is. In the beginning, I was a little afraid to talk about how consistently effective it was, because I thought, well, maybe I'm overstating it. But I'm not. After seeing this at least 10,000 times be consistently effective, I can state with absolute certainty that this is not oversimplified. It is simply simple, not simplified. And so, I mean, think about it. Doesn't happiness have to be simple? If it were complicated, then God somehow intended happiness only for the smart people. Does that make sense to anybody? And it only makes sense that a psychoanalyst would say that this is oversimplified, because psychoanalysts need happiness to be very complicated, because then we would need them. Whereas what I'm suggesting to us is that we can all find happiness, that we don't need complicated and expensive psychoanalysts. And we've proven that with absolutely consistent experience. So it's not just a theory. So what I would recommend to your friend is try it, live it. And if after he's learned the principles and after he's lived them for several months, then let's hear his opinion of them. But for someone to offer an opinion having just heard of them, having read a few pages, not worth much. Further amplification of the oversimplification. She was referring to an oversimplification in terms of dealing with bipolars, schizophrenics, and borderline personality people. If you look, there are places in the literature where I specifically say that I exempt people who are schizophrenic and have personality disorders and so on, and make it clear that these people are very resistant to real love. They're also very resistant to psychoanalysis and exceptionally resistant to medication. These are people who are resistant to pretty much everything. So what I tell people is, and there's a place in one of the books, and I can't remember which one, whether it's Real Love for Wise Men and Women or in the book Real Love, I lose track. But what I say is the first thing we try is real love. And after someone has been unsuccessful with consistently applying the principles of real love for months, and they're still unhappy, they should definitely get a psychiatric evaluation. So we're not oversimplifying, nor are we discounting the value of psychiatry. I have referred many people to psychiatrists because there's a huge benefit in that. There are people who literally cannot feel real love because they are so impaired by schizophrenia, by their bipolar disorders, by their borderline personality disorder. We have also discovered that it's very common for people who, for example, have bipolarity to go get their bipolar disorder treated to where they get enough under control that even though they're still quite unhappy, now at least they're enough in the world, the real world, that they can be affected by real love and can achieve quite a large measure of happiness. Some of those people can then be affected by real love enough to get off their medication. I'm not suggesting everybody should. Some people need to be on their medications for life. All I'm suggesting is that there is a synergism between medication and psychiatric treatment and real love in these complicated cases where people have things like bipolarity and borderline personality and so on. I've also seen people who have borderline personality be strongly affected by real love, although it doesn't cure their problem by any means. Personality disorders are not curable. Real love nonetheless works better than anything else that's done with them. So I'm not suggesting real love is the magic bullet that always works, but it works better than anything else. And short of severe psychiatric problems, it is phenomenally effective in almost all cases. So I don't live in a dream world about always works and no need for psychiatric help. So the question here is, are these people who have these other things resistant because of biochemical reasons, or is it from emotional damage from past experiences? Yes, it's both, in my opinion. Some of these people have been so damaged from past experiences that they become so afraid, so wounded, they won't let anybody get close enough to them to even be loved. Even though what you offer them is unconditional love, they're terrified. They won't let you anywhere near them. So part of it is experience, and part of it is really biochemical. People who don't have very much experience with mental health problems really don't understand the importance of the biochemical aspect of mental health. If somebody has a derangement in their chemical makeup in their brain, nothing is normal to them. They don't think normally. They don't feel normally. They don't react to people normally. They don't feel love normally. And we can't discount that. Many of those people who receive then medical treatment can sometimes begin to feel real love, but some cannot. And I recognize that completely. I'm all in favor of medical treatment. I was a medical doctor for 12, I still am, but practiced for 20 years. Here's another questioner that says, and if you have more questions about that, don't hesitate to keep going. In exercise 6, I'm not sure which book that is, it says we have to tell the truth about our past, but a person whose name I cannot pronounce, Ganjaji, says that when we are over something, we no longer have to tell the story. And Eckhart Tolle says, forget about the past and live in the now. Oh, would that that were so. It's cute to say that, and that we no longer have to tell it, but it still lives in us. That's the reality of it. It's just a fact. We simply, because we are flawed individuals, are incapable of simply giving up the past. Eckhart Tolle is quite right. It would be delightful if we could just, that would be the way to live. Past is gone, the future doesn't exist yet, and so let's live in the now. Oh, that is so sweet. But we're flawed human beings who don't have perfect faith and don't have perfect vision. And so what happens is, if I don't have an opportunity to tell the truth about myself to someone, what usually happens is I go around my whole life thinking, yeah, you say you love me, but you wouldn't love me if you knew this. That's the problem. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to tell the entire truth about yourself to everyone. No. Like I was saying at the top of the hour, we need to pick in the beginning people that we think are easy to tell the truth to, people who are accepting, forgiving, kind, open, who have demonstrated that they're not tending toward criticism. We get accepted a little bit by those people, then we tell a little bit more of the truth, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more, and we want to increase both the depth and the breadth of the people, the number of people that, and the depth and breadth of our truth-telling. So eventually, we want to get to the place where we have told all of the truths about ourselves to someone, maybe two people. Only we can know what that is. To discover only this, that no matter what we have done, we are lovable, that we have been loved no matter what we've done. I completely agree with you. It'd be just delightful just to blow off the past. But we really have to experience that. We have to know it. We can't guess at it. And I've seen the truth of this revealed over and over again. I've seen people who have gotten to a certain level of happiness in their lives, and it just stops. And finally, I've said to them, there's something bothering you. And watch these men and women just break down in tears and say, how did you know? And I knew because you could tell that they felt loved up to a certain point, but they were afraid that they wouldn't be loved if everybody knew that horrible little thing they'd done. And in that case, I say to them, you don't need to tell me. I'm not pushing you to tell me. But if you do, it may free you from these chains. And it has in every case. I had a man the other day come to see me who was 70-something years old. He'd been carrying around with him a burden of something he had done when he was 13. It had been bothering him for 61 years. He'd never told anyone because he was so ashamed. Oh, he'd read all the stuff. He'd read Eckhart Tolle. I'm not sure he had read Gangaji. But he understood that we should just be able to let go of the past. But he's a flawed human being like the rest of us. And he came over because he said, I have to tell someone. So he told me. It was moderately horrible, but no big deal in the overall spectrum of human behavior. And I just embraced him and said, and I understand. I said, you know, at the time that you did this, who were you? You were empty, afraid, lost. You had absolutely no idea how to unconditionally love other people. And the only thing you knew how to do was use people. Defend yourself against them, manipulate people, use them for feelings of praise, power, and pleasure. And that's what he had done in this case. And in the process, hurt another human being. Well, how do we learn without hurting other people? And he just, the tears just rolled down his face. The burden just lifted off his shoulders. And I said, now, do you feel like you need to tell anybody else? And he said, nah. He said, I know that I'm loved having told just one person. And that's why it's so important. Make sense? I feel like the principles of real love are true, but it's like saying $1 million would answer my immediate financial needs. That they are true. But there are not folks out there that can love me. I feel like real love principles are true, but the solution is likely not achievable or difficult or unlikely for most people. Only because the pool of people out there, I assume you mean the people to love you, is small. Yeah, I really understand that. And you would think that because the pool of people that you have known all of your life who have criticized you, told you were worthless, made you prove your worthiness for their affection all of your life has been huge. And compared to that pool, yay big, the number of people that you've met who can unconditionally love you would appear to be like nothing, like the head of a pin. So I get that. I'm going to suggest to you something, though. I'm going to suggest that the thing that is limiting that pool is you. It's your faith. It really takes faith to find wise men and women. It does. It takes faith that if you tell the truth consistently, you will find those people. One of the things that you have done to protect yourself from pain, and you've had a lot of it, is arrogance. Well, there's nobody out there who can love me, and partly you've set up a barrier. There's nobody out there good enough to love me. You've set it up where people have to love you so well, so perfectly, before it counts as love to you, that you've made it so that the pool is minuscule. You see that? You don't allow little bits and drabs of love to come at you from people who are grossly imperfect. And I get that. I mean, when we've been stabbed and cut and wounded and criticized and chained and controlled our whole lives long, we really don't want anybody to get near us unless they're pretty much demonstrated to be flawless. I understand, but there aren't very many people like that. And so we have to be willing to accept even the flawed losers like me, to let them love us. And I'm just going to suggest to you that it's about faith, that it's about telling the truth to more people and doing it consistently. What you've tried to do is you tell the truth about yourself a little bit, and then when it's not overwhelmingly rewarding, then you quit. And now you have nothing. So the person I was just talking to said, oh my goodness, OMG. He just provided a revelation. So I'm dying to hear what the revelation is. While he's coming up with the revelation, the man who was talking about the psychoanalysis, I believe, it's hard to follow all these trains, was saying that since I've been applying the principles of real love and focusing on being seen, and I'm assuming focusing on being loving, I have noticed that all of a sudden my business has picked up and all of these new opportunities have been coming. Bless your heart. This is something that bit by bit we're going to get across to the business world. And I haven't written the book, Real Love in the Workplace, yet, but I'm getting there. Everywhere we go, when I say that the greatest need that we all have is to feel unconditionally loved, that's not just the greatest need that we have here in our homes, or in our living rooms, or in our bedrooms, or with our wives, or with our children, or at family reunions. This is the greatest need that we have everywhere we go. Everywhere. And so when we walk into work, that is still our greatest need. I mean it. I was a surgeon for 20 years. And although for almost all of that time I still had not formulated the principles of real love, somehow in the back of my mind, back of my heart, I knew what I was looking for. And as patients would come in, what I consistently did was virtually sit in their laps and touch them and look at them in the eye, touch their knee as I talked to them. We had patients come in all the time just to be touched. There wasn't anything wrong with them medically. They came in to be touched and looked at. They came in to be loved. If we give our coworkers, our employees, our bosses, our customers, everybody in the workplace, the unconditional love that they're looking for, our experiences at work will phenomenally change, because that's what they want first. Now, what do I mean by unconditional love? I don't mean come into the place and hug them and kiss them and say, I love you unconditionally. On the whole, that will go over poorly. No, it's more genuine than that. It's more relaxed than that. It's when somebody comes at you complaining, you actually listen to them. It's paying attention to them instead of defending yourself. It's asking the boss, what can I do to help? It's when somebody gripes and complains, getting to the root of the problem instead of ignoring or defending. So I'm not surprised to hear what you just said. In fact, I'd be thrilled if you would be willing to write me at greg@reallove.com and tell me more about these experiences of how your business has changed since you have been practicing real love. I'd be fascinated, because those are the kind of experiences that we're putting in the Real Love in the Workplace book. I'd be honored if you'd be willing to do that. About the revelation, about the real love not being sufficient to apply to this one man's problems. He says, my revelation is this, that I have a resistance to doing what I need to do to support my feeling of victimhood and thereby gain drips of temporary power. And also that the problem is me. So aren't you really saying that you have a resistance to giving up your victimhood? You have a resistance to giving up the consistent effects that you get from power? Is that pretty much what you're saying? Because victimhood, I do not exaggerate when I say that victimhood is more addictive than cocaine. I'm not kidding. You can identify cocaine powder. You can't miss it. I mean, nobody says, oops, I stumbled and fell and buried my nose in a pile of cocaine accidentally. You got to work at it. You can see it, and so you can also avoid it. Whereas human beings are around us everywhere, all the time. And so there are our sources of power. There are the ways that we can act like victims. And it's just irresistible. Because as victims, we can find ways that people have hurt us or failed us or have made mistakes or screwed us over. We can find those, almost every minute of the day. And in fact, we can sit in one place without changing our position, and just in our thoughts, we can come up with ways that people have hurt us and stay in an eternal state of victimhood. And it's so addictive. Because if I'm a victim, look what I get out of that. I'm never responsible for anything. I never have to do any work. You do, because, see, you're the monster. I never have to change. You do. I'm always hurt, so you owe me. I never get what I deserve, so everybody else has to scurry and rush about to satisfy my needs. What a position. As a victim, I become the center of the known universe. See that? That just sounds very attractive. Everybody owes me. And so that's why so many people are victims. And in the short term, victimhood is very effective, down to just little things. I mean, like, you come in a room and you go, you make any kind of whining noise, the entire room turns to you. Oh, what's wrong? Whereas if you simply do something kind or charitable, you can't produce as effective and predictable a response. Whereas victimhood is predictable. Boy, you can get stuff out of people. The problem with victimhood is that even though you can get sympathy, power, sex, all kinds of things, you never feel loved. Ever. Because real love can only be given unconditionally, freely. And the instant I act like a victim with you, I have just manipulated you for whatever you give me. And although I may not be able to put it into words, I feel like I've manipulated you and destroyed all possibility of feeling unconditionally loved. So here's the ultimate irony in the universe. I'm a victim only because I'm empty and alone and afraid that I won't get loved. I'm a victim to get love. And the instant I act like a victim, I can never feel loved. Oh, what a tragedy that I use, that the very behavior that I use to get what I want makes it impossible to get what I want. Oh, it's deadly. And most people never break out of that cycle. You'll see victimhood in almost every movie, every book, every anything. Get together for any family reunion, and you will just see the victims lined up along the walls. You'll see the mothers controlling entire families by acting like victims. It's quite a tool. And so understandable that it would be hard to give up. And brave of you to acknowledge that you do it. Now the trick is talking about it enough and being unconditionally loved enough as a victim that you'll find real love more attractive than victimhood. Because until real love is more attractive than victimhood, you'll continue to act like a victim. Duh. It's worth more. very good questions. These questions have been so good that everybody else is terrified to ask any. So it looks like we have questions coming in. So the question is it possible to find people who know real love without studying it? Are there people who just know how? Yeah, there are. As I have crisscrossed the country and spoken to tens of thousands of people, I run into about 1 in 100 people, and that's been pretty consistent, who knows someone in their life, a parent, a grandparent, an uncle, an aunt, somebody, who just seems to have a natural ability to unconditionally love. And it has made a huge difference in their life. But let me tell you this, that without studying the principles of real love, the problem is that these people who have a natural ability to love almost never have the ability to pass it on to other people, to teach other people how to love. Make sense? For example, somebody who just has a natural gift to play the piano. Those people usually are lousy piano teachers. They think that you're just born knowing how to do it. So when it comes down to teaching you the elemental steps, start from the beginning, they have not the foggiest clue. They figure you just get up in the morning and you play the piano. So that's been my experience with people who are just naturally unconditionally loving. They often are able to do that, and they're able to raise children who feel loved. But those children, in turn, have had a difficult time passing it on to theirs because they didn't know what they were getting and how they were getting it. So they didn't know how to pass it on. So no criticism of anybody, just an observation of how it works. The more we understand a thing, the better we are able to repeat it. And that, after all, is the goal, isn't it? The biggest reason that I wrote all the books has been so that we get it, so that we understand what we're doing, so that we're able to repeat it consistently so that we can pass it on to others. Here's a question. It seems like almost every song, every movie, every TV program portrays victimhood universally. That is a fact. I'm having a hard time paying attention to it. However, I don't want to turn my radio or TV off. So what do? Oh, easy. You just recognize it. I see the same thing that you do, and yet I don't turn it off either. Now, there are some programs I can't watch. The victimhood is just too overwhelming. It's too painful. But on the whole, we are affected by it most when we are still being victims ourselves or are drawn into their victimhood. So the more unconditionally loved and loving you feel, the less those programs will affect you. And so what happens is you will see them and just go, they must be really feeling empty. You'll tend not even to identify them as victims. You'll just go, that's sad. They need to feel. You would know how to approach them and help them. Sex, for example. As my wife and I are watching a television program or a movie or whatever, and there's some chick who just doesn't seem to quite know how to keep her top on or doesn't know how to dress appropriately. Whereas in the old days, I would have found that distracting. Now we look at it and just go, oh, I mean, the poor thing, it's the only way she knows how to get anybody's attention. It's the only way she knows how to feel worthwhile. We see it as it is, but without condescension. The more loved you feel, you don't ever go, oh, well, acting like a victim. There's just never that sense to it. You simply identify that, yeah, that's a pretty victim-y thing, and you see the solution for it, and then you just let it slide. Because you also know there's nothing you can do about it. The more loving you become, the more easily you also let go of situations that you can't help. And so then it becomes easier to live around it, because not only is it in the movies and on television and in books, it's everywhere we look. I mean, you go out to eat and everybody who's sitting around you is using some getting and protecting behavior, and I don't feel terrible. I don't feel like walking up to them saying, you know that you're doing this, and I don't feel bad that I can't address their problems. You address the ones you can. This person says, I've been trying to use real love in a 12-step program, and while the new people are interested, the older people eye my comments with suspicion. Am I trying to do something impossible? I completely understand the position you're in. I was in a 12-step program for a good while. And what I would suggest is that, well, first let me tell you the situation you're in. You may already know this, but in the 12-step program, you got to remember that to many 12-step people, 12-step is much like a religion. It's as close to a religion as they have. And so when you come in and you attempt to modify the 12 steps in any way, which to them are really sacred, these are the principles by which they live their lives, you are frightening them. They really believe this is the only way to sobriety, even though it's not. So it's scary to them. And so to such people, you might even couch it in terms of the 12 steps are beautiful. I personally believe that they were divinely inspired. Bill Wilson, who began the 12-step program, my goodness, at the time that he wrote these, which I think was the early 50s, there was nothing like this. Self-help programs didn't exist. This came out of nowhere. This was definitely a divinely inspired work, no doubt about it. And they're true. But what 12-steppers often fail to understand is that they aren't the ultimate goal. And that what they are is just a means to the real goal, which is to help people feel loved. And so you can offer that. You can say, all I'm suggesting is that these 12 steps, for example, if you go through, you'll see that there are steps that involve telling the truth. There are steps that involve acknowledging our faults. You see, all the things that we talk about in real love, a lot of them are there. But what they need to understand is that we do all those things so that we can feel the love of one another and the love of what they call a higher power, or God, or whatever you care to call that. So you might just say, nope, I'm not disagreeing with any of the 12 steps. Just adding more of a higher purpose to them. And then if somebody still disagrees with it, you just say, it's just something I offer as a possibility. Never bring up something in a spirit of contention. Because the moment you attempt to argue with someone, they'll feel like you're attacking them. Then they won't feel loved. And look at the irony of that. Trying to attack someone with real love, I mean, kind of silly, huh? So you teach the people who can listen. And then perhaps outside the group, you can teach the newer people. Inside the group, you teach what people can hear. But it's never wise to keep talking past what people can listen to. It's just unkind, even if what you're teaching is true, even if it's important, even if it's essential to their well-being. If they can't hear it, you're done. See, this, get enough real love, then... it's just a short phrase, so I'm going to try to make of it what I think it means. It just says, oh, right above it, I feel like my relationship is hopeless. I assume that's your relationship with your significant other. And the only reason I keep trying is that there's so much imitation to lose, which is way better than nothing temporarily. Can you promise that if I just get enough real love, then nothing else matters? Here's what I can promise. That everything you said there may be true. It may be that that's the reason that you're afraid to leave your relationship, because you're just afraid to lose the imitation love. But rather than propose what's going to happen down the road, stick with right now. You need to get over the fear that you have of sharing who you are with more people, and the fear that you won't find them, and be able to experience enough real love in your life that everything else will become clear to you. It will. When we don't have enough real love, we are so empty and afraid that we literally become emotionally, psychologically, mentally blind. We don't see anything. We don't see logical steps. We don't see the sense of things. We don't see the love in anything. We become really stupid. So to try to explain how a thing is going to happen down the road in the absence of real love, it's like explaining complex colors to a blind person. No kidding. So what I suggest is this. Stick with now. Regularly. Not in the intermittent kind of on again, off again, and I'm not picking at you. Well, I am little. Instead of intermittently telling the truth, you make it your cause in life to tell the truth about yourself to several people a day, but not just, it's not just a truth-telling exercise. It's an intimacy exercise. You're pretty good at telling the truth, actually. I've heard you do it. But you're often missing the end result. And that is, you don't leave a call until you feel loved. That's the critical step. And you're often missing that. So you need to actually feel loved every day. And as you do that, as your emptiness and fear start to go away, you will start to see everything differently. You, your partner, your relationship, the universe, frankly, and your questions will become different. Your attitude will become different. The questions you have now will simply disappear. They'll alter. So I would stick with that first. It'd be like when somebody's learning addition, saying to me, well, but what's it going to be like when we get to differential equations? Learn multiplication first before we get to that. This business of getting loved is just too important. Questioner says, if only 1 out of 100 are born with the ability to give real love, isn't it almost impossible to find real love outside of your program? Excellent question. And I have apparently misstated this. So what I'm saying is that 1 in 100 are born with the ability to unconditionally love in a consistent way. I believe that nearly all of us, as in, 95%, roughly, that's just kind of a guess, 95% of us have the ability to unconditionally love intermittently. And that is everything. So it's like this. Although maybe only 1 in 100 can love me consistently, unconditionally love, I don't need to find those people. As I tell the truth about myself, about little things, and if you read in the real love literature, there are lots of examples of how to do that. But like, let's say, for example, I say to you particularly, let's say that you're not one of those 1% who's consistently unconditionally loving. But I say to you, yesterday I was having a conversation with my son, and there was something he hadn't done on time, and darn it, I got irritated with him and told him he should have done it different. And most of the time, what we do is we blame the person who didn't do the thing right. What if I say to you, and I've just been learning that every time I get angry, I'm the one who's being unloving. And what he really needed from me then was unconditional acceptance. Now, maybe some guidance and instruction too, but with my anger, what I was saying was, I don't love you. And the instant I said that, our conversation was ruined. I was being selfish. Now, that's an example of truth-telling. All I said was, I was being selfish. In that moment, I can tell you that 95 out of 100 people will be fascinated by what I just said. And what if in that moment you say to me, well, dang, Greg, that's cool. I never thought of it quite like that. I guess you're right. Where did you learn how to see it like that? In that moment that you said, whoa, you were accepting me with my selfish anger. See that? You are giving me a moment, just a drop of unconditional acceptance or unconditional love. Now here's the cool thing then. Every time I tell the truth about myself to people, to you, I'm not only creating a moment for me to feel unconditionally loved, but I'm also creating a moment for you to discover the unconditional love within you. As we tell the truth to one another, we get love, but we also practice being loving. We create wise men and women. So we don't have to find that 1 in 100. We have to find the 95 in 100. And frankly, that just ain't that hard. So this brings us really back to the discussion from the other man who was saying, you know, his reluctance to go out there and tell the truth to more people. They're out there. They're all over the place. We're not shooting for, it's not a huge gamble to find people who can love us. As we tell the truth, we'll just naturally attract loving people to us. And they'll give us whatever little morsel they've got. Now, they might not be able to love us 5 minutes from now. If we did something to them, they probably wouldn't be able to love us. Do you see? But when I'm telling you the truth about something unrelated to you, I'm talking about how I offended my son or my wife or somebody else. In that moment, you're able to love me. That counts, honey. That's unconditional love. And when we start to put those moments together, more and more of them, that's how we fill up with the $20 million. So can you see how phenomenally cool it is? That we can go out and find it that easily and put it together and get that much, and it becomes not a hard-to-get thing. It becomes really simple. So I want to thank you all for coming. This has been a very rewarding chat session for me, and I hope for you. We will be back next week, not on Wednesday, as it is tonight. We will be back on Tuesday. So 6 nights from tonight. And in the same format, I hope that you will come back, bring friends or whoever, and we'll answer whatever questions posed. But this has been delightful, and I encourage you to remember that it's always about real love.